Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for taking your time this afternoon to participate in the Connecticut SAT School Day webinar with a focus on accommodations in College Board Services for Students with Disabilities, SSD. My name is Deirdre Ducharme, and I work for the Connecticut State Department of Education in the Office of Student Assessment. And presenting with me and joining with me today are my colleagues from the College Board, as well as the Connecticut State Department of Education. Our program manager for the Connecticut SAT School Day is Michelle Rosado. And our bureau chief for the Office of Student Assessment is Abe Christ. Thank you both for participating. And then my co-presenters from the College Board joining us are Adrienne Cooper and Keisha Smith. Next slide, please. The purpose of today's presentation is to share with you an overview of the accommodation process for the Connecticut SAT School Day. I'm going to open up by sharing some general updates regarding our transition to the digital assessment for spring of 2022. As you've heard by now, we are no longer using a paper pencil format of the Connecticut SAT School Day. So this spring 2022, your students will be taking the Connecticut SAT School Day digitally. And many of them are quite savvy. They've participated in Smarter Balanced assessments over the years, as well as Next Generation Science. So this transition might be a little, not necessarily tricky, but this certainly is a transition for administrators, but perhaps less of a transition for our students. The College Board's digital SAT transition is in conjunction with their contract with Cambium Assessment Inc. So you may be familiar with CAI. We use the CAI test company for the delivery of Connecticut standardized assessments, and the College Board has also partnered with CAI for the delivery of their online SAT assessments. If you have students that qualify for the use of Braille or large print paper materials, certainly your students will still be able to use these accommodations regardless of the transition to the digital platform. We understand that the digital system may not meet the needs, access needs of all of our students. We will provide webinars throughout the course of this fall and winter and leading into the test administration. So please stay tuned for webinar updates in which we'll provide information about the digital testing and tech readiness. Next slide, please. The primary test dates for the Connecticut SAT School Day include two windows. The first window is March 23rd through the 25th rather, and March 29th through the 30th. Your students will be able to test within both of those test windows as long as they're testing on the same day in which they begin the test administration. We do have an accommodated test window for those students who qualify as a 2-day tester based on perhaps double time or some of the other accommodations. And so the accommodated test window runs from March 23rd through April 5th. We also have a makeup test window. So for your students who are not present in school during the 2 March windows, your students will be able to participate in makeup testing on April 26th through the 28th. I'm now going to focus on the accommodation process for students eligible for accommodations on the Connecticut SAT School Day. Just as a reminder, the purpose of this presentation isn't to talk about the shift to digital testing. We will have a presentation on December 6th that provides you with that level of information. But really, the purpose of this presentation is for our new school coordinators, our new SSD coordinators, or those who need a refresher on the accommodation process with the College Board. So who qualifies for the Connecticut SAT school accommodations and who qualifies for English learner supports? For starters, as a reminder, accommodations are changes in procedures or materials that increase equitable access to assessments. They are available for students who have an active individualized education program, IEP, or a Section 504 plan. Within these plans, there should be specific information regarding the student's access needs and those support that provide students with accessible access in which they can show what they know and can do when they're taking assessments. Students with an active IEP or 504 are eligible to participate on the Connecticut SAT school day with assessments. The student's IEP or 504 plan must specify what those specific accommodations are. Students who are formally identified as an English learner may also qualify for supports on the Connecticut SAT school day. Verify with a written English learner plan to determine which supports, if any, are needed for the student to access the Connecticut SAT school day. And finally, there may be a small number of students within your 11th grade population that does not qualify for the Connecticut SAT school day. For these students that have significant cognitive disabilities, they may in fact qualify for Connecticut's alternate assessments, which comprises of a math and English language arts and a science component. I will address that more information regarding our alternate assessments later in this presentation. Next slide, please. Who oversees the submission of accommodations for the Connecticut SAT school day? The Services for Students with Disabilities SSD coordinator is the key person in a school to coordinate all the activities regarding student accommodations. Typically, there is one SSD coordinator at each of our high schools, but given the fact that the role is quite substantial, more than one person can serve or assist the SSD coordinator in the various tasks that are required when submitting and processing accommodations. In order to gain access, schools will need an attending institution AI code issued by the College Board. Now, most of our schools already have an established AI code, but if in fact you represent a new school and you don't have an AI code, please reach out to our office and we'll work with you and the College Board to make sure that you have the necessary code in order to even register as a new SSD coordinator. So our SSD coordinators serve as a liaison between their students with disabilities and students who are eligible for accommodations and supports, and they work with the College Board and the Connecticut State Department of Ed to make sure that the accommodations are entered in the SSD system and approved prior to testing. The submission window for accommodations specific to the Connecticut SAT school day runs between November 29th and February 2nd. We will release specifics regarding the EL 50% time and a half window. I can tell you that you will have access to making the request for your English learners in the month of January, but we will have specific dates to share with you later this month. Next slide, please. The College Board Services for Students with Disabilities SSD online system is the one-stop place for you to access accommodations that may have already been entered or approved for students taking other College Board assessments, or it's the place where you'll enter accommodations for new students who are eligible. If you're a new coordinator, when you log on to SSD Online, there's information about creating a new account, as well as steps for returning coordinators that might need a refresher in how to navigate the online system. There's some reminders though for our SSD coordinators. Students must have approval in SSD in order to take the Connecticut SAT school day with accommodations. Otherwise, students' results will be canceled. The student's school documentation, such as an IEP or a 504 plan, provides parental permission to apply for accommodations. Therefore, there's no additional form that needs to be sent to the College Board when you're submitting requests on behalf of your students. And finally, before any student is denied an accommodation, the primary SSD coordinator will be contacted by me to have a conversation to ensure that the information that's needed in order to make a final determination is captured correctly in SSD. And I will work with you on behalf of your student and the College Board to make sure that we have your students' access needs considered and the most appropriate accommodations in place. So if at any point there's a question about your student's status, or if more information is needed in order to approve an accommodation, reach out to me, but certainly I will be working with the College Board and may reach out to you if we need more information. There may be a situation in which you're going to submit a late request beyond that February 2nd date. So I'm just going to let you know that if you have a new student that's perhaps new to Connecticut, new to your high school, or if a student has a new disability and a new plan, then certainly reach out to me, give me a heads up, let me know that this accommodation was entered after February 2nd. And again, I'll work on behalf of your student to get the accommodations approved. My colleague Keisha Smith is now going to walk you through the SSD online process. Thanks, Keisha.
Thank you, Deirdre. Good afternoon, everyone. So we're going to briefly go through the process as far as navigating your dashboard. Once you have followed the steps, as Deirdre has previously explained, and you now have yourself established as the SSD coordinator, whether you are the one primary at your school or if you are just identified as having SSD user entitlement, you will be able to access the information that we are displaying here today. So as you will see from your dashboard, there will be helpful links that are located at the top. There's information, a plethora of information there. You also will have access to pre-recorded audio information that gives you installation information about the MP3, gives you any type of walkthrough if you are unfamiliar with using the pre-recorded audio, which was formerly referred to as MP3 accommodation for students. You will also be able to access your non-standard administration report, also referred to as the NAR. The NAR we will also briefly touch on later in the presentation, but this information will be available to you as you get closer to test day in terms of accessing your NAR. Your NAR is typically available 4 weeks prior to test day. But just very briefly, in order to start your initial request, you're simply selecting the New Request tab, and then we'll go on in the presentation to additionally walk you through. Next slide, please. So through the SSD Online system, you have the ability to submit requests, monitor your requests, and you're printing the reports. If anyone is more familiar with the previous process, you had to, in order to provide printing reports, there was an eligibility roster, but that roster is no longer accessible directly through SSD Online. You're doing it directly from the dashboard, and it allows you to print. So when you're monitoring your dashboard, you're determining is the particular student that you're submitting for, does the student already have accommodations in SSD Online? If you're not sure, when you go in to submit the request, you usually will see some type of message to let you know if that student, based on their name and their date of birth information, if that does not match up. Also, when you're providing your information for the student, you want to make sure that student information is accurate. Next slide. Okay. And before moving on to the next slide, just a reminder, my apologies everyone, is also making sure, does the student currently receive accommodations in school? I have a slight delay on my end. When you're on your dashboard for your students and you're beginning this process, we do recommend that you have the information in front of you so that you're able to submit it all at the same time. It's not typically a long process with the new platform version that we have. The new platform version was released in December of 2020. So it is a much more modified version, but it is important to have information such as the student's IEP or 504 in front of you so that you're able to respond to the questions. When you start the process, you will be asked to select if the student would be eligible for College Board approved accommodations, which is from the first tab, or if you're entering for your English learner supports. So just be very mindful that you are specifically selecting College Board approved accommodations for your students with diagnosed disabilities. They will be processed through this window. The second window would just be specific to your English learner students, and those students would only need to be entered for 50%. That's the only option that will be available for your English learner supports in SSD Online. There are additional supports available, such as word-to-word glossary, but you do not have to enter that information. Next slide. So just briefly reviewing what I had mentioned before. So you're initially doing a search because we want to make sure that we're not duplicating student information in the system as much as possible. You're entering student's first name, last name, and then the school. That tab where you see the drop down, it will automatically indicate your school because in most cases, an SSD coordinator will have access just to their attending school for the students. If you have multi-user access in any case, you would select the drop down and then make sure you select the correct school because that is where your student would be placed. If there are any names matching, as you can see in the example, several names will show if it matches the student name. If not, you will just indicate student not listed and then select continue to move on to the next screen. Next slide. This is very self-explanatory. You're adding your student information. Again, just make sure that you're entering the information correctly. You will also have an option, the opportunity as you get towards the end of the submission process to make any edits, but if possible, try to make sure that you're entering all information here correctly. So you're entering student name, date of birth, school will already be pre-populated, the expected graduation date. You want to make sure, if you can, just to indicate that students, so for this year, grade 11 would be 2023. Just make sure, because it helps in the matching process. And then, of course, selecting student gender information. Contact information would also be required through the initial process. So you're entering student address and contact information here as well. So this is briefly just before you begin. It's asking that you're aware of the time frame in terms of to enter the request. It's very brief, normally 6 to 8 minutes to overall complete, letting you know that by starting this request, you will need to enter disability information, followed by plan information, and then finally, what we would normally refer to as documentation. Again, documentation for the purpose of CT, SAT school day participation for grade 11. If documentation is asked, you're submitting a copy of the CT school day letter only. In certain cases, and Deirdre briefly touched on this, in certain cases, if there's a request where we need to receive some more information, that will be routed directly to Deirdre, and she will communicate with the school in order to get some additional content to proceed with the request. Next slide. So again, the pop-ups that you're seeing here is just an overview of what's required. Disability information, followed by plan information, and then the Connecticut documentation form in order to process the request. Most of the requests that you will see that you're doing will very likely not require the Connecticut form, because most of the requests will be processed through what we refer to as verification. And verification simply means everything that you identified through the initial process would not require any documentation to be submitted. However, if you have a student, just to give you an example, your student's disability is listed as other, you will see a pop-up saying that documentation would be required. If you're requesting for accommodations, typically where the student has to be in a one-to-one setting, or a certain amount of time to test, such as 100%, those are the types of accommodations that will typically, or requests that will ask for you to provide the documentation, which is the Connecticut form for the purpose of SAT School Day. So when you're starting your request, you're providing this information, identifying the accommodations that are required for the student, providing plan information, and then reviewing the overall entry just as a final step before you submit the formal request in the system. So the first part, going back to what we discussed earlier, is when you're entering your student's disability. Most of the more commonly known types of disabilities are automatically provided here under the varying disability categories. Again, if you do not see for any reason, if you do not notice the specific disorder for the student, there's also an option to indicate other. But in most cases, that information would be listed. But when you're actually in the live system, you're able to expand the page, and it's a much longer list of disabilities that you would select from for your students. Here is where, as I mentioned, with the other option, if for some reason, if it's not listed, you will indicate there. Next, you will go on to your accommodation selections. From here, this is where you're going to indicate exactly what it is that your student will need to participate in CT SAT School Day. And you're going to specify it based on the accommodation category. So we've given the examples here: extended time, which would be 50, 100 in some rare cases. If this is something that the student's receiving in school, some students with that are severely impaired may require more than 100% time. But again, that should be based on the accommodations that they are regularly receiving in school in the classroom environment. Other categories would also include extra and/or extended breaks, reading, seeing text. We have a variety of accommodations under that. Recording answers, modified setting. This would be possibly if a student cannot sit in a room with other students, but possibly would need a one-to-one setting as an example. And then there's also other. We are aware that some of those other accommodations are not that common, but we just typically provide the most common type of accommodations that are provided, but we will also review any other requests for students. Here's just a quick example of when you're selecting accommodations specifically for extended time. You will indicate here reading, writing, math. Those are the sections for CT SAT School Day. Listening and speaking, you do not need to indicate. There's no listening or speaking section for the SAT. So next, under the school plan information, you're simply responding to questions about the student's plan. Is it an IEP or 504? These are public school students in most cases, so it's IEP or 504. If there are any other schools that would be participating, falling outside of the public sector, then it would need to align with the type of plan provided there. Yeah, we're asking when did the current plan go into effect in order to know that this plan is considered current and the student is currently receiving those accommodations. We still ask the question, is this the student's first educational plan? If yes, then you're indicating that. If not, No, it's not. It's just to really help us throughout the process for understanding certain requests that are coming in. And what was the student's initial educational plan? Because sometimes there may be transition. So a student may initially go from a 504 to an IEP or vice versa. Next slide. Okay. So continuing with the plan information, you're being asked additional information about the plan. Are the accommodations listed on the current plan? In most cases, they are, so you're selecting yes. Does the student consistently use the accommodations on classroom tests? In most cases, yes. That is something to be very mindful of, because if the student does not typically receive the accommodations or actually using them in the classroom, be mindful of having that conversation with the student and family in preparation for test day, because if they're not familiar or accustomed to using these accommodations regularly, the concern would be that the assumption for the student is that he or she does not have to use it. And if they're taking the assessment with it, because there's no self-pacing when using the example of extended time, that amount of time would be provided for the entire assessment. You will go on to the next page and continue to submit the plan information in terms of was there a meeting, the process for determining the student's academic functioning, and the need for the accommodations. You're also being asked who was a part of the team in order to have that discussion. If you're not sure and you just select other professional and you just add a note in that you're not sure, it's okay. And that's also for the question at the bottom as far as what information was used to assess the student's current need. You usually, in most cases, I find, will have this information. If for some reason you're unsure, please select other and move on. Selecting other in this category will not impact whether or not you have to provide the Connecticut contract letter. Next slide. Again, it is a very brief process as long as you have your information in front of you prepared to submit the request. So here you're just being asked to review your information, make sure there are no misspellings for the students, showing the disability, the accommodations. You will also be able to see graduation date if for some reason that is incorrect. There is also an opportunity after you've submitted the request where you can change the graduation date from the student's profile page. That is one feature where you can formally go in and change it yourself. But all of the other information you cannot change it once you've formally submitted the request in SSD Online. So we want to make sure that you're verifying your information is accurate. There will be a window asking that for the next intended College Board test date. This is really for the process of us making sure that we are matching all of the students who are identified as grade 11 testers participating in the spring SAT School Day digital assessment. Next slide. Okay. If you are required to provide that documentation, which for you would be the 2022 grade 11 Connecticut SAT School Day letter, you're simply going to upload that information here by selecting the tab that says select file to upload. Once you do that, and once you've uploaded the information, you will hit submit and the request will continue to process. You will also go on to one more page where it will ask you just to verify that the information you're submitting is accurate. Next slide. Okay, so just as I explained, this is the terms and agreement that you are verifying that the information is accurate. You are requesting information based on what's on your student's plans. You're simply going to swipe the button over to the right and then select agree and continue.
Great, thank you, Keisha. I appreciate this overview. And as a reminder, if you're feeling a little overwhelmed, some of the key takeaways right now between um, this date, November 8th, and when the SSD system opens for accommodations on the 29th, you can actively begin reviewing your students your 11th grade students that may have already been approved for accommodations in SSD. So as a reminder, if you do have students that received accommodations on previous SAT assessments, then no action is required unless you have a student that requires a change or update to their account. Accommodation requests submitted in SSD will provide your students with approval for accommodations not only on this upcoming Connecticut SAT school day, but if they end up taking SATs in the next year ahead, the accommodations will stay with that student. And again, as a friendly reminder, if you have any questions about your student's accommodation status, whether it's a situation where the accommodation is pending or you're waiting review and you need an update, then just give me a call or send me an email. Next slide, please. On December 6th, our office will be presenting with the College Board details about entering accommodations into the TIDE system for digital testing. So certainly we'll relay the next steps and responsibilities for our SSD coordinators. So don't panic, there's certainly some good information to come, but I want to encourage you to maximize some of the materials that are available now. So if you're interested in getting a sneak peek of what the digital assessment looks like for kids taking the SAT, especially in relation to accommodations, then check out the College Board's digital platform. There are some great webinars and resources related to accommodation essentials. And then on the Connecticut SAT School Day webpage, we have a couple of resources that are new and related to digital testing. So for instance, we have a what to expect for digital testing brochure, as well as a 2022 Connecticut SAT School Day accessibility chart. This is a chart that you might have, if you work on the NGSS assessment, you're probably accustomed to having an outline that specifies the different universal tools and designated supports and accommodation for our statewide assessment. So we have a customized accessibility chart specific to the Connecticut SAT School Day. I encourage you to check it out. Next slide, please. So what types of accommodations are available to students with 504s, IEPs on the Connecticut SAT School Day? So certainly keeping in mind that we have students that may need access supports to access the presentation of the assessment. Perhaps you have a student that uses Braille or perhaps requires large print. We have options that will support your student with their presentation needs. We also have supports for students that need extended time, given that the SAT is a timed assessment. So we offer extended time with two options. There's a time and at 1/2, 50%, as well as double time. And then for students who may not need to sit for that on the clock time, perhaps they benefit, some of your students may benefit from breaks on demand or extra breaks. So we do offer some time-related options in SSD for kids that can't sit for the prescribed time allotment with the SAT. We also offer accommodations for students who may need modified test settings, such as kids who require small test group setting or one-on-one. If you have students who have print or visual disabilities, we offer the use of assistive technology. For our kids who take the paper pencil SAT, the College Board offers an MP3 option. For students who may have hearing impairments and require the use of a human reader or ASL, there may be some options available to them as well. So take a look at the slide. We've identified some of the most common accommodations requested for the SAT, but this is not an exhausted list. So just take a moment to look at these. And then the next slide, we're going to talk about some of the some of the accommodations that will require a little bit more thought and consideration on behalf of your students' specific needs. So the considerations for time extension. We first want you to we want to encourage you to determine the needs of your students in terms of their cognitive or physical load when taking a standardized time test. Is this student receiving this accommodation on other district-wide assessments? Are they receiving extended time on a regular basis during instruction? And does this extended time make sense to the student? As mentioned, there are two options for extended time. There's 50% time and a half as well as double time. So think about how the time may impact, the prescribed time may impact your student at the time of testing. You also want to think about whether your student's going to need this extended time for reading, writing, math, if maybe all of the subtests or not. So think about the options that are most appropriate for your student based on his or her disability or accessibility needs. Students with extended time are tested separately from those taking the assessment using standard time. So students must remain in the room for the entire designated extended time. So think about the impact that this may have on your student, especially those students who may have anxiety or express frustration due to their specific individual needs. For students who leave a test session early because perhaps they didn't sit for the full 50% or double time, then those test scores will be invalidated. So it's critical that if students are approved for that a lot of time, that they sit and remain in the test session for that full duration. Students approved for time extension will automatically receive breaks. So you won't need to make a special request for extra breaks or breaks on demand. And finally, indicating more than 100% testing time will require the provision of additional information in SSD. So if that information is missing, then more than likely I will reach out to you and work with you to make sure that we have the appropriate supports in place for your student. So this slide here just delineates between our two types of extended time across subtests, and then just reiterates that students are eligible for extra breaks. So you'll see that our students testing double for reading will test over 2 days. As mentioned, we have accommodations for students that require supports for reading and seeing. Our students that require the use of assistive technology will work with the College Board in advance to make sure that the assistive technology is approved by the College Board, and also the functionality works prior to testing. We don't want any surprises when a student sits down to participate in their test. For students who require the use of Braille test, we have Braille booklets available for students. And again, depending on what the student's specific needs are, we will be able to accommodate them. Keisha.
Thank you, Deirdre. So I just wanted to highlight something that is very important for educators to be aware of when submitting the request. For the purpose of the pre-recorded audio, as the information was noted, it automatically includes 100%. Therefore, there is no option to request for only 50% because you think the student would need less. If the pre-recorded audio option is too long for the student, it's too much time for that student, you may want to consider a different type of request. And there are other options in terms of, for the purpose of when you're taking it through the digital platform. So again, that will be addressed in an upcoming meeting, but just be mindful of that because 100% time is a long amount of time for a student to test. But certainly if they need that, then they will need to receive it for the entire exam, and there's no flexibility for the amount of time that would automatically be included with the accommodation. Thank you, Deirdre.
Great, thank you, Keisha. All right, so just not to belabor the issue, but just to give you an example about what the break options are. So for your kiddos that may where the extended time may not be appropriate for them. We do outline some of the specifics regarding extra breaks versus extended breaks that are twice as long than extra breaks, and then the breaks on demand, which may be beneficial for students who have medical needs. So for kids who might need to take medication or check their blood sugar, or get up and stretch because they have anxiety or whatever it may be. So just keep in mind that there are these options for our students. Next slide, please. Briefly mentioned earlier that we have options for students who require testing in a modified setting. So some students may benefit from testing in a 101 or small group, and you may have students that require testing at home or in a hospital setting. So again, you can work with the College Board to make sure that the appropriate test setting matches your students' needs. Next slide. If you have students that require some of those extras, such as the need to test their blood sugar or permission for food medication, those accommodations do need to be requested in SSD. So keep in mind that where there might be more flexibility in some of our non-test time standard assessments, such as Next Generation Science or Smarter Balanced, the College Board does request that these extras be requested and processed through SSD. And when students use devices such as their cell phone to check their blood sugar, the College Board does have some prescribed recommendations as far as how that device is handled in a secure test environment with a test administrator. So those details will be released in the student's SSD account and through the NAR. So the NAR, the non-standard assessment report, will include some of the specifics related to the provision of the student's accommodations. Next slide, please. And we do have a process for special documented accommodations. Typically, these are requested for the Smarter Balanced and Next Generation Science assessments. We don't really receive many of these for SAT, but if in fact you have a student whose needs go above and beyond the accommodations that are listed or available in the SSD or those identified in the assessment guidelines, we will work with you on behalf of your students to make sure that based on your student's documented need that we can accommodate them. So we have a specific process. We have a petition that you will complete in conjunction with perhaps the IEP or 504 team. There's a specific window beginning December 9th through March 1st in which you'll submit that special petition. And if you think you have a student that qualifies, please reach out to me. The earlier, the better, and we'll get you started with the petition process. Next slide. And for English learners, the College Board offers a variety of supports for our students, and many of these supports do not need, actually, in fact, most of these supports do not need to be requested or approved through the SSD online. I will mention that your English learners who qualify for time and 1/2, they would receive this accommodation for all SAT subtests, so for math and reading and writing. And this request must be made in SSD in January, and students must receive approval. These kids will also be included on the non-standard report 4 weeks prior to testing. If you have students that would benefit from written test directions, the College Board offers 14 different languages in which these written test directions can be downloaded, printed, and then disseminated to students on the day of testing. These resources are available on the Connecticut SAT School Day webpage. So if you need access to the link, you can access them there, as well as a list of the College Board's bilingual dictionaries. So these do not include definitions, but these bilingual word-to-word glossaries are available in a variety of languages. And if your students are accustomed to using these bilingual dictionaries, they are permitted on the Connecticut SAT School Day. If you have a student whose language needs are not met under the options for written test directions, and if you have a staff person in school that speaks that student's native language, you can have that individual serve as a native language reader for test directions only. So again, that's an additional support available to our English learners. Next slide, please. Keisha mentioned the non-standard administration report, and I know that I've referenced it a couple times over the course of this presentation, but as a reminder, this is a critical report that will be available in SSD 4 weeks prior to testing. And the SSD coordinators are going to use this report to work with their school coordinators to make sure that they have allocated staff to serve as test proctors, to make sure that they have the test rooms available for these students, and to make sure that the kids have the non-embedded accommodations perhaps that they need. So whether it's assistive technology or for your English learners, students who may need those bilingual word-to-word glossaries, you want to make sure that you know the materials and know in advance the materials that your students need and make sure that they're available at the time of testing. And in subsequent trainings that we offer prior to March, we will dive deeper into the NAR and provide you some more explicit information about how to use the NAR for your planning. Next slide, please. Briefly, just to touch base on the Connecticut Alternate Assessment System for students with significant cognitive disabilities. If you have a student that qualifies, we have a specific process to make sure that the student has the correct assessment in place at the time of testing. So Connecticut offers we provide an eligibility form specific for students with significant cognitive disabilities. And this form walks our PPTs through the eligibility process. The forms are submitted through an online data entry interface, and we have specific deadlines included on this page that do impact your 11th graders. So if you have a student that qualifies, these forms need to be submitted by December 22nd. There's a little bit of wiggle room if you have a student that's maybe a late PPT and you're waiting for the sign off, but we do have a specific process to make sure that the right kids are identified for the alternate and therefore don't participate in the SAT school day. There is a online training that our teachers participate in every year. These are the teachers that administer the alternate assessment. Typically, these are the teachers, the student's primary teacher, but there is a formal training process, and we have a variety of material available on our website. If you have a question about the alternate assessment, then certainly give me a call or send me an email. Next slide, please. We have some resources just to help support your work in the weeks ahead. The assessment guidelines is our go-to resource, all things related to testing and accommodations across all of the statewide assessments. So whether you're curious about interim assessments or the college SAT school day, we have a variety of information about the accessibility features and accommodations for each of our assessments. It's a live document. We update it yearly, but certainly take a look at it. We've just released updates for the 21-22 school year. On the Connecticut SAT School Day webpage, we have a resource specific to for our EL supports related to PS 8, 9, 10, and the Connecticut SAT School Day. The College Board has a great SSD module, Understanding College Board Accommodations, really specific to SSD. So if you're a new SSD coordinator, I recommend that you check it out. And then we have other resources specific to our English learners. So check out the Connecticut SAT School Day webpage. Next slide, please. I've included our contact information. Michelle Rosado, our program manager, is an integral part of this assessment. So please reach out if you have any questions related to any of the programmatic things that come up in your planning. You have my contact information as well as the SAT School Day customer service hotline and email address. And our last slide includes just a couple takeaways as you're thinking about digital testing. So I've included one of the College Board's digital, like on their digital platform, they have an accommodation essential module. It's maybe 30 minutes long. It's great. It talks about the digital aspect of accommodations, and I've included links to the student assessment newsletter. That's the publication that goes out usually like on a bi-weekly, monthly basis, all things related to testing And I've also included a link to the Connecticut SAT School Day webpage. So if you can't find it on the SAT website, check out the Connecticut CSDE webpage, and then definitely reach out to us if you have any questions. All right, so we have 10 minutes left. I think this might be a great time to stop and answer any questions that you may have.
Deirdre, I was able to answer most of the questions in the chat, although there were a couple I couldn't get to, so I'm going to share those with you, or I didn't know the answer to. So the first one is, will the color contrast options be the same as what is currently available for Smarter Balanced? I do not know what's available for Smarter Balanced, so I figured I'd toss that one to you.
They are actually. So if you look at the accessibility chart, well, actually the accessibility chart may not provide that level of detail, but I did do a cross check and the options match. You will notice though that the naming conventions for some of our accommodations in TIDE for Smarter and NGSS, there may be some variation like in the nomenclature, but essentially the options are just about the same and they function the same.
On the naming convention side, just so that you know, we will be providing kind of a crosswalk to help you understand kind of what's in an IEP, what's in SSE Online, and what that converts to in TIDE to make it a little bit easier for you guys as you're setting those things up for students.
Yeah, and just to reiterate, so we had the question about color contrast. The same applies for font size. So we offer the same options. The College Board offers the same options as what we have available for NGSS and Smarter.
This one I think is actually probably for Keisha. Keisha, someone said they noticed that other health impairment was not a choice in SSE Online. Is that true? And if so, can you talk about that a little bit more?
Yes. So if you, when you're in SSD Online and you're looking for OHI, OHI actually will fall under applies to the other category. So you will need to select other, indicate OHI and any other specification if needed, and then continue on through the process as we displayed today.
Great, thank you. I'm just scrolling through to see what we may have missed here. There's a question, will you be sending a copy of the question and answers from this as we did Thursday? And Michelle, I believe you will be sending a copy of the questions, is that right?
Hi, yeah, I'm working on actually compiling the questions from Thursday, and then we'll add these in there as well. So yeah, working on that. It might take a little bit because I have to circulate it among all of us, but yes, definitely.
Great. Okay, so there were two questions that I will actually take for you. The first one was for the PSAT 8-9, they had to go into TIDE and enter the accommodations, the CB approved accommodations. Is that the same process for the Connecticut SAT School Day? The answer is yes, that is the same process. We will be covering that more in the December training. And so we will go through that and with screenshots and a lot more detail in the December training on how to configure those accommodations in TIDE. There is a question about is PSAT 8-9 or 10 going digital? So as of right now, all schools are able to order PSAT 8-9 in the digital mode if you would like to do so. PSAT 10 at this point is not available digitally for schools that are not part of a state contract for that assessment. So right now, Connecticut schools cannot order PSAT 10. However, like I said, all schools can order PSAT 8-9 digitally if you want to administer that test and do that digitally. There's another one here. If a student has breaks as needed, do they have to have one-to-one testing? Or are they allowed to leave with an escort while the person administering the test stays in the room? Keisha, could you take that one?
Sure. So for breaks as needed, typically we would say yes, it has to be in a one-to-one setting. However, we do understand that for the purpose of school day, in school participation, that you may have multiple students. So when the student is taking a break, if you have more than one student in the room receiving that same accommodation, you just want to make sure that when the student has to take the designated break and they're leaving that room, that there is someone, you have like the hall monitors, the designated persons that are responsible to make sure that students are not wandering off by themselves. There will still need to be someone to be with that student at the time that they're taking the break. So it is monitored in a particular way. So if I did not, for any reason, if I did not clearly answer your question, just follow back with another response and I'll respond as well.
Here's a question. To request extended time for an EL student, do they have to be on a formal learning plan or just be qualified as an EL student? The answer to that, I believe, is that they just need to be qualified as an EL student. Correct me if I'm wrong, Keisha.
Right. So we do say, and I know that, each state may have their own requirement under who identifies as EL, but we would say, yes, if that student is identified as an EL student and that aligns to CSDE's requirement, then that student would be eligible to test as long as they are grade 11 participating in SAT school day.
Okay, so Keisha, just can you reiterate what you said about students with breaks as needed?
Of course. Okay. So the first thing is that breaks as needed would be for your student who needs to take a break more often than other students that would normally just have a break automatically built into the test, right? So your student, let's say, that has a physical medical condition where he or she needs to use the restroom frequently. Ideally, we would say breaks as needed would be in a one-to-one setting. We know that when you're participating in an in-school test and you have multiple students that may have that same type of accommodation, they can be in the same room. When the student needs to take that break, one, we want to make sure that it's not causing distraction for other students. So if you have a student that based on their disability would need to break more often than other students, that student you would need to consider either putting them towards the back of the room or the front, depending where the closest to the door. Reasonable break would also be recommended when we're talking about breaks as needed, no more than 10 minutes because you want that student to complete the test in one day. And when they're taking that break, the student would need to, it would fall under the same standard processes or policies for College Board when students receive a break time. So they're not just leaving the room by themselves, it would be monitored. So that would be the process. And it's also included in terms of in the manual, but they're just not randomly getting up. They have to raise their hand and then the procedures would be followed for the proctor and or hall monitor to, make sure that that student is going to where they need to go. They're going to the restroom and then coming back within that reasonable amount of time.
Okay. And I am just going through, I think we've gotten them all, but let me just confirm that. Yes, we are all set.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Adrian and Keisha, Michelle, Abe, and all of you for taking an hour out of your very busy schedules to participate in this training. I want to encourage you to reach out to your colleagues, your technology coordinators, to remind them on November 17th at 1 p.m. we will be hosting a technology coordinator meeting, a first for the Connecticut SAT school day. So our targeted audience is our tech coordinators, and the purpose of the presentation is to provide an overview of specifications of the digital system and the role of the technology coordinator. And since you, our SSD coordinators, are with us today, make sure that you signed up for the December 6th session at 1 o'clock, in which we're going to focus on accommodations and the TIDE system. So please join us. If you need to find us or have questions, reach out. You have our contact information. Thank you and have a great afternoon.